Hello, and welcome to Hofstra Law School's Video Viewpoints series. I'm Kristen McMahon. With me today is Professor Julian Ku, a professor of law and expert in constitutional law and international law here at Hofstra. Welcome, Professor.
Thanks, Kristen.
So, President Obama recently announced that starting next month, the U.S. will have a new role in Iraq. We'll be focusing on diplomacy rather than military action. Can you explain your thoughts on his proposal?
Well, I think the plan that he laid out is not a plan that he developed. It's a plan that was developed in the last year of the Bush administration in cooperation with the Iraqi government, and that's important. And so this is something that President Obama, when he came into office, reviewed and then sort of has obviously made his own. He's agreed with it and is going to carry it out. But I think the plan, which was in cooperation with the Iraqi government and with the support of both the Republican and Democratic administrations, is a sensible plan. It's a reduction of U.S. military forces, so they're no longer involved in direct combat, but likely to be a long-term, this is still unsettled, but some sort of long-term military presence in a non-combat role in Iraq, I think. That's something which I think is going to be beneficial for the United States in the future, would be a good outcome, would be most analogous to the long-standing U.S. military base in South Korea, which has, I think, in my view, served U.S. interests during that period and was something which is no longer controversial in our domestic politics. So hopefully in the future that would be something that we can see in Iraq, some sort of not controversial, a secure presence, no more combat, but an ally in the Middle East for the United States.
And over the past 7 years of the war, there's been a lot of political debate and controversy among the public. Can you please lay out some of the legal issues that have arisen, both internationally and domestically? Yeah,
there are kind of two big legal questions that have been raised by the war with Iraq. I think you're right to frame it in both international and domestic. Let's start with domestic. When the United States goes to war, this is something that I study and research. There are constitutional law requirements and other legal requirements for the United States to make the decision to get involved in a military conflict. This is something that has been debated for many years in the United States. But interestingly, the Iraq War, this was not a legal problem domestically. There was no serious legal debate in the United States that it was, with respect to the legality of the war. And the reason for this is that President Bush went to Congress, and Congress gave him, at the time, an overwhelming vote in favor of military action in Iraq. And so for domestic constitutional purposes, that's more than enough. On the international level, this was where the big debate was, and the question was whether or not the United States could engage in an invasion of Iraq without the authorization of the United Nations Security Council. That was the big legal issue that was raised by many foreign countries and by many international lawyers. And the first Gulf War was authorized by the United Nations Security Council. The second, the Iraq War in 2003, was not, as famously we remember with the debate in the United Nations. The question is whether it would still be legal for the United States to engage in that war without the specific authorization of the United Nations Security Council. That's a question that is still rather murky. There are people who would say, clearly you need authorization for that situation. But there are other scholars who say that the authorization had already been given, left over from the first Gulf War, or that the authorization was not needed because of the perceived threat that Iraq posed with its, at least at the time, people believed its possession of weapons of mass destruction. That legal question, the question of whether it's legal internationally, has never been a big issue here in the United States in our domestic politics, because it's not a question that the courts here would be able to address. It's more of a political question that would not be raised in a court proceeding here.
And what's your scholarly opinion as to whether or not action has been legal in the international?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this one. This one I think that it was a very close call, but that it was legal based on the evidence at the time in 2003. If we knew today what we knew then about the lack of weapons of mass destruction, then there obviously was not the kind of threat to international peace and security that, and actually threat to the United States that was believed at the time. And so if we had that evidence today, I think it would be improper and probably illegal for the United States to engage in the invasion. But at the time, I believe there was a solid legal basis for military action based on the prior relationship between Iraq and the United Nations.
And what about the more broad war on terrorism? Is that something that's recognized internationally as being something that's legal?
Yeah, that's another really great question. And again, it really intersects with the law because we know about the war on terrorism, the idea that we need to engage and use military forces to fight the people who are involved in the September 11th and subsequent attacks. And that is something which the United States and both the Bush and Obama administrations have held that that is what they call in legal terms an armed conflict or a war. Right? So that's a war, an armed conflict. But that's not something that's accepted by all countries. And there are many countries who would say that although the conflict in Afghanistan is in fact a war in legal terms, outside of Afghanistan, there is no armed conflict going on. It's just the war within Afghanistan is the only armed conflict that has been authorized or that should be recognized. The United States government does not take that position and has engaged in military activities in other countries like Yemen, Somalia, and other countries in efforts to attack and in Pakistan, of course, to kill or attack us with the Al-Qaeda terrorists or September 11th terrorists. That is the war on terrorism.
And the targeted killings you mentioned in Iraq and Afghanistan, do those differ in any way legally from those in the other countries you mentioned we're not at war with, such as Yemen or Pakistan?
Yeah, the targeted killings are the signature policy of the Obama administration. They actually, it's something that candidate Obama pledged to increase dramatically when he was candidate, and he did. There have been targeted killing is the use mostly of these drones to fly around, and they shoot these missiles at you. It's pretty scary, actually. And he pledged that he would do this even outside of Afghanistan and Iraq. Within Afghanistan and Iraq, those are clearly armed conflicts that the entire world would accept as military actions that are appropriate. Outside of Afghanistan and Iraq, in Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia and other countries that are not disclosed, a lot of countries would say that's not legal. That, in other words, it's as if someone came into the United States, flew a drone missile, and blew up someone here, right? We would consider that to be illegal, and some other countries would consider that to be illegal as well. So targeted killings, the question of them is twofold. One, are you using these military weapons in a zone of recognized armed conflict? And the only zones of recognized armed conflict for many countries is Afghanistan and Iraq. Outside of those areas, there's a huge debate as to whether it's legal to do so there. And then the second question is, to the extent that you are using it, are you using it indiscriminately? Are you shooting at people and you are accidentally or inadvertently killing people who are innocent civilians? And that's the second charge that's been raised against this policy, and people have argued it's illegal for that reason as well. There's also a third point, which is that the Obama administration has, for the first time, declared that it has the authority to assassinate U.S. citizens as well. So whether or not you're a U.S. citizen doesn't protect you from the use of these predator drones. And so they can designate you, and they have designated certain U.S. citizens as enemies who can be targeted if they're found and killed. That would be a further legal question under U.S. law, whether it's legal for the president to simply designate someone and then and kill them. I think that for the most part, though, we've reached some sort of equilibrium. In Afghanistan and Iraq, those types of killings, for the most part, have been carried out properly and legally. The most common use of them is in Pakistan, which is right across the border from Afghanistan, and is justified twofold. One is that Pakistan is not protesting, it's authorizing the use of the weapons there, which gives it legal status. And two, that for the most part, the missiles are being used with very little, they're being highly targeted. They're not killing innocent people for the most part, although we're not really sure about that. So I think on those grounds, so far, it stands up to legal scrutiny. But there's a lot of information we don't know about the program. I think one day there could be an investigation, perhaps a finding the program is being used much more widely than we know about in many other countries. And if that's happening, then that would be of highly questionable legality.
Well, thank you, Professor Ku. For more information about Hofstra Law School, visit law.hofstra.edu.